The aid should have been sent 6 months ago. The shell shortage is so bad right now that I know people training tank crews, and they're playing laser tag to train the tank crews, where they've tied like laser things on the front of them so they don't use shells and instead can train by just basically doing laser tag. There's been reports by major outlets of them using smoke shells because that's all they have, and they use it basically like a cannonball to hopefully scare the advancing Russians away. There's a lot less live fire training. The Ukrainian government reports a shell deficit of 10 to 1, meaning that for every 10 shells that the Russians fire, the Ukrainians can fire 1 back. And when it comes to aircraft, the ratio is 30 to 1. Now, those numbers are from the Ukrainian government, so you could say, oh, these numbers to encourage it. But I've been with the artillery teams. I don't think I've ever been with the artillery teams outside of maybe a brief period during the Zaporizhzhia counteroffensive in localized. That means areas like in the localized area, they have artillery dominance. I've never been with them or seen them have artillery superiority. And I think that it is getting worse, and it's getting worse every day. And so I think a big motivator as to why Mike Johnson ended up passing this is he realized after having an intelligence briefing, and this was later, I said this talk because I heard the way he talked, and he talked like someone had just scared the shit out of him when he first talked about it. He said, I've seen the intelligence, I've seen the stuff, and like somebody scared him in an intelligence briefing, and Pravda is now reporting that they did. So I think that they were told that a breakthrough is real. It's a real possibility now because the situation has deteriorated so much. The Russians aren't capturing a lot of land, and the Russians are taking crazy casualties, unsustainable casualties, if this war was to last like this 3-4 years into the future. But if the Russians can break the Ukrainians now, then there's no question about sustaining it 3-4 years in the future because they can just rebuild later. But now that the aid's gotten through, I think there's a real fear that they're going to use this window to push as hard as possible, because I'm getting reports of chemical weapons usage on the front line by the Russians, where they're dropping chemical bombs on Ukrainian frontline positions. And this has been reported by the Telegraph. I know Jimmy Rushton, he did a report on it. It's real. This isn't like a rumor. Are the Russians using chemical weapons? We know that the Russians are using chemical weapons, and they're using them in hundreds and hundreds of instances.
As Michael Tracy verified at Dylan.
Now, I don't think Michael Tracy has stuck his phone into a military base yet to confirm if this is real or not. But they're using them to try to break, because if you're in a trench and a bomb falls and it starts excreting chemicals, you don't know what that is. You're going to run. You're going to panic. And in some instances, that's what's happening. And as they run away, as they get out of these safe trenches, even if these bombs can still catch fire and stuff, a lot of them are just like, like riot control grenades. And maybe they can breathe through it. It can still cause a fire in an enclosed environment. It's much more dangerous. But this is still illegal in the law, under the laws of war, and it can scare people away. And then as they're running away, they hit them with drones, they hit them with artillery, hit them with mortars, and they take the position. This is illegal, but the Russians don't care. They're doing it. Biden said in March at the start of the war that if the Russians did this, there would be consequences. I have yet to see that.
Well, so I wonder to what extent consequences would have to involve Congress, right? I mean, obviously the State Department, Defense Department are given considerable latitude, but if anything involves if anything requires finances that aren't already allocated, that means Biden is kind of at the mercy of Mike Johnson and the Republicans. And to me, what's funny is, so to the extent that I've covered this, I've made it abundantly clear. And by the way, chat, I'm Jessiah. I'm with Pondering Politics. It's a domestic political commentary channel. I worked with Dylan in
big
Ohio.
Libertarian influencer.
Exactly, as libertarian as it gets. But to the extent that I've covered this, to me, it's important that I acknowledge what Mike Johnson did, but he's no fucking hero. Like, it actually kind of annoys me to see some of the effuse praise of Mike Johnson. As you said, the substance of this bill that he's passed was effectively what President Biden proposed 6 months ago.
Yep.
And this idea that, it took this long, Johnson, of course, what Johnson's done. I'm sure you've seen the press conferences. He's like, well, you listen, we got to socialize and build consensus and all this stuff. It's like bullshit. You were probably, as you said, spooked in an intelligence briefing. But the 6-month delay wasn't out of principle. It was out of partisan politics.
Yep.
So as far as I'm concerned, the guy's a fucking loser. He really is. I'm going to give him credit in as much as I would give somebody credit for not punching a baby after 6 months of punching it. Like, hey, congratulations, you stopped punching the baby. But this guy is I think that coverage of him should be critical. I understand why the White House has pulled back. I actually read a Politico article about this where that was part of the president's negotiation with, once he felt that Johnson was leaning in that direction, that they were going to release the Ukraine bill, that the president basically told his comms team, he's like, hey, ease the brakes on attacking Johnson right now. But I think the attack should eventually resume. This guy is a joke. I think it's actually disgusting that he has participated in the delay of these things for as long as he has. And I'm curious if this is a game changer. Like, will this 6-month delay, could this 6-month delay have turned a potential success for Ukraine into a defeat?
It's already, well, I mean, this is the thing. People constantly like to declare different moments. The war has been lost. The war has been won. In my opinion, the dice of history is still rolling, and there's still so much we can do. A lot of people, I think, resign themselves into defeatism to remove responsibility from themselves. That, well, if this ends up with Ukraine losing, then they were going to lose no matter what anyway. Which, that's not how history works. If you take different actions, there's different points where you could have gone this way or you could have gone this way. You choose to go this way, that has consequences. You don't give the Ukrainians those jets early on to help them get local air superiority or try to defend their airspace better, that's going to have consequences. You block attack shipments as the British go further than us and send the Storm Shadows, that's going to have consequences. When we have the most political consensus to support Ukraine, we do not get the funding necessary to do this into the long term and to be able to ship them not just 31 Abrams, which I think sometimes we treat our weapons like magic. We're going to throw out 31 tanks is going to change the war. Our tanks are good, but you need them in quantity. 300 tanks, 400 tanks. Those are the types of things that could really shift the balance of power. But there was a question of escalation. And so at all these points, we chose to go the way we did. That we're here now. And I think that some of the things we did ended up helping Ukraine a lot with our shipments. And some of the decisions we make hurt us. And I think we could have been in a much better position if we delivered these things earlier, if we got this aid to Ukraine sooner. And I don't want to do this with every decision, so I'll just focus on the aid. If we got the aid back in September, when it was first being really discussed, when Kevin McCarthy was still in there, because Kevin McCarthy was the first one, you got to put some blame on him, who kicked the can down the road. You said, well, we're doing the budgets right now. Well, okay, I have this, problem with my party right now. He was the first one to kick it down the road. And when somebody initiates kicking something down the road, it gets much easier to keep kicking and keep kicking and keep kicking.
Now you've established the precedent.
Exactly. Yeah. It was at that time that the Battle of Avdiivka was being fought. And Avdiivka was a Ukrainian salient that gave them access or range closer to the city of Donetsk, which the Russians took back during 2014-2015 period. And this was a salient that the Russians had tried to take for 6, 7, 8 years, and it failed again and again and again. It became almost like a city of legend in Ukrainian military history. Oh, you're going down to Avdiivka, the city that's held out again and again and again through all these assaults. And so the Russians got it in their head that they wanted to take Avdiivka. Some say it was for political reasons, because since it had so much symbolism, if Putin could take Avdiivka, then going into the elections, he could point to it and say, look, we have victories, we have victories. Others would say that, and I'm one of these as well, that the Russians still very much want to take more land, if not all of Ukraine if they can. And so if they keep pushing to take the rest of the Donbass, Avdiivka's part of the Donbass, it's one of the cities they eventually would have to go through. And they ended up taking probably like 30 to 40,000 casualties trying to take Avdiivka. One of the Russians that published a report about it literally killed himself because the numbers were so bad that the government wanted him to shut up about it. And so he put a gun in his mouth and he blew his brains out because the numbers were so bad. And that was early on. So before all the casualty numbers had even come in, and he did that. And more people have died since then in offensives. The Ukrainians also lost a lot, but they said multiple times during that battle, because they did eventually lose Avdiivka, they lost the fortress. It was a big morale blow to Ukraine. Ukraine decided they didn't want to do another battle of Bakhmut because they just didn't have the manpower to dedicate to holding it street by street, room by room. And so they pulled out, and they said openly that our artillery shortage heavily impacted our decision to pull out, and we couldn't, and we probably would have been able to either hold it longer, or maybe, who knows, permanently, maybe they would have been able to win the battle, who knows, if they had it. Now again, I don't know, because I don't like alternative history scenarios, but I will say this: if they had more shells, more Russians would have been lost during the assault, and they probably could have held Avdiivka at least longer. making it a bigger problem for the Russians, making them have to expend more resources, more tanks, more BMPs, which they did already expend in high numbers. But these are opportunities to wear down the Russian war machine that don't just appear every day. And it was an opportunity we could have taken advantage of more, but we decided to sit on our hands. And when people talk about like the process of like, oh, well, you know, you need to get everyone's support and this is democracy and how it works. This is a war. This isn't a bill about like, are we going to ban this book that has too many boobs in it? Or, you know, this book who, you know, are we going to make Budweiser the America's enemy? Like, this is not some rinky-dink domestic political issue that can be picked up, put down, picked up, put down, whenever.
It's not.
If you don't solve the issue now, people die. If you do not solve the issue now, people die. Battles are fought, whether we want to view it or not. Just because it's not on TV doesn't mean the fighting has stopped. And I feel like a lot of people in Washington took on that perception. That's not how you win a war or be a reliable ally. And let me just say, it's not just the Ukrainians that are looking at this too. South Koreans are looking at this. I have Taiwanese friends who follow this every day because they think, for obvious reasons, that this could relate to America's reliability in supporting them. And so it's, I mean, even though we've sent the aid, damage has already been done and probably will not be undone to American credibility for a long time.
No, yeah. So it's not a BS messaging culture war nonsense like Biden's coming for your gas stove, that sort of bullshit from which Republicans can launch their latest culture war. It is substantive. And to your point, even if we grant the premise that, oh, it's about consensus building and it is about popular support, backing Ukraine and their resistance against Russia still has popular support from the vast majority of Americans, and really even a majority support from Congress. See, that's the thing that's kind of fucked up about our system.
73%. That was the final tally.
73%. Right. So you think about this. I mean, obviously it has more Democratic support than Republican. But again, when you combine the bipartisan coalition in both chambers, it's an overwhelming and decisive majority. That's the problem. The Republican Party, particularly in the House, have become this, you know, dysfunctional minority. And obviously the Republicans have had a vested interest in terms of just broader electoral politics, in terms of enshrining minoritarian rule. I mean, they haven't won a popular vote for the presidency but one time in the past 30-something years. It really is gross. And I think we often, I mean, I even think I do it myself in a way when I think about this stuff. You know, it is a matter of life and death, and it's pretty easy to gloss over it because it's life and death over there, right? But it was an absolute moral pitfall on what they did, on what the Republicans did here. And that's why I go back to saying, I mean, if it can extract meaningful concessions from Mike Johnson, I'm happy to pat him on the back if that will actually get us consistent results. But as far as just the moral value of congratulating Mike Johnson, that guy's a fucking loser. As far as I'm concerned, he's complicit in whatever consequences the Ukrainians face as a result of the 6-month shortage, just as much as Kevin McCarthy is. But that's my take on it. But I'm also that asshole who doesn't think that Mike Johnson deserves, or not Mike Johnson, Vice President Mike Pence deserves like the Presidential Medal of Honor because he decided not to try to overturn a free and fair election. It's like, dude, you did your fucking job. What do you want? You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I'm glad you did, but you're not a hero. You're not George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Mike Pence, you know, or FDR. So that's my take on it.
I mean, I think, you know, I was already not happy with Mike Johnson going into the position because he doesn't have a good voting record on Ukraine, right? He didn't have going into it. And while he was saying he wouldn't abandon Ukraine, I think for 6 months, that's what he did. He did abandon them for 6 months. And he can justify that through any political maneuvering that he wants. But the bill that was put forward a few weeks ago was the same bill that was put forward 6 months ago with a few rinky-dink alterations. The alterations was turning the financial aid into a loan, so we've increased the financial burden on Ukraine. Congratulations. They switched it so that the president has to release a plan on supporting Ukraine in the next 45 days, and it asked for the president to send ATACMS, which was good, but I mean, that was already a decided decision in February, according to reporting from the New York Times. So it was good that the Congress would hold him to that, but it was something that could have either been done separately or was something that the president was already going to do anyway. And so for these alterations, 6 months of time was not worth it, especially since many of these things would probably already have been done anyway, like the ATACMS shipments. And so when you look at the bill that was proposed 6 months ago and today, and you see so few alterations, what was that time used for? That time was used for a few things. Number one, he said openly that we're not going to deal with Ukraine until we figure out the budget stuff. Now, that was ridiculous because the budget stuff kept getting kicked down again and again and again. They kept continuing resolution after continuing resolution.
Yeah, and can we pause on that for just a quick second? Just this is really important because I think, again, it's so easy to get lost in the timeline, but the budget thing should have been opened and shut because President Biden and Speaker McCarthy negotiated the next year's fiscal budget during the debt ceiling negotiations in 2023, which, by the way, even that predicate, like, the debt ceiling, raising or suspending the debt ceiling is something that's done bipartisan. Both parties spend, the money and add to the debt. And the bill came due under Biden. It was money it was expenses accrued under the Trump administration primarily, but also Biden. And even though Republicans were happy to raise or suspend the debt ceiling under Trump, they didn't want to do it for Biden because they wanted to use it to bend Biden over a barrel. Now they negotiated. Biden got the upper hand for the most part.
But
100%. He added $8 trillion in a 4-year term. It's the biggest contribution to the debt in a single 4-year term. So much for being fiscally responsible.
And I remember when he said that he was going to cancel the debt in 4 years.
Yeah, he not only wasn't going to add to it, he was just going to wipe out all the debt he inherited. But yeah, so fucked up. But anyway, so whatever. Biden negotiates with McCarthy. They agree to terms for the next year's budget. McCarthy reneges on the deal. McCarthy violates the deal. Pitches a continuing resolution, which is kind of this half measure. Then he gets kicked out. Johnson inherits the speakership or becomes speaker. And then, getting back to it. So I guess my point is the reason I want to emphasize that is because we cannot, I think it beggars belief at how utterly the Republicans fucked this whole thing up because even if you grant the premise we got to deal with the budget first, motherfucker, you guys made a deal for the budget and the Democrats and Biden held up their end. You all chose to renege on yours.
They reneged on a lot of
even
deals.
That. Right. So anyway, I'm sorry. So yeah, go ahead. So you said the debt thing. Go ahead.
It was the debt thing. And by the way, I'm not a huge Nancy Pelosi stan. I'm not a Newt Gingrich stan. I'm not a stan of really any of the previous speakers of the House. But they could do 2 things at the same time. They could do 3 things at the same time. The speakership was never a one and done job where it's a busy job. If you didn't want to be Speaker of the House, maybe you shouldn't have gone for the position.
Sure.
But putting that aside.
Well, yeah, there's no question. I'll say this about Pelosi. I mean, she's got, especially with like the insider trading and stuff like that. I mean, you could make the argument that she's as systemically corrupt as anybody, but in terms of being administratively skilled, she is vastly superior, infinitely better than Kevin McCarthy or Mike Johnson. They fucking wish they had a Republican Nancy Pelosi who could work the same margins like that. I mean, she basically had the same margins McCarthy did, but the motherfucker kept stepping on rakes anyway. So yeah, they wish they had somebody in there.
The problem is all the people with some institutional skill are now completely despised within the Republican Party's base, and the people and the votes that they would need to put those people in the positions. Like, I'm not a fan of Tom Emmer, but like a Tom Emmer, they're getting thrown off by the most rinky-dink nonsense. Tom Emmer couldn't get the speakership in part because he voted in favor of gay marriage in the most recent resolution in favor of gay marriage. After they were talking about it might get overturned, and he said, you know what? It's a safe bet to vote in favor of this now because times have changed. Guess not. Guess they haven't changed enough in your party, and that delayed it further.
Did you? You know what's funny about Emmer too? I don't know if you remember this, but you saying this reminded me. Do you remember when he threw his hat into the ring for speaker and Trump shit talked him and he tried to suck up to Trump afterwards, and then Trump shit talked him again, and then these people have no sense of dignity or self-worth whatsoever. So gross. Anyway, I'm sorry. You were saying about Pelosi and stuff. Oh, I hear you just fine.
Is this better?
Oh yeah, you sound better now. Yeah,
there we go.
I heard you just fine before.
That's much better. Yeah. But this is how I view it, and this is how I view it because I was watching the start of this from in Ukraine. Kevin McCarthy, there was a need to pass Ukraine aid. Kevin McCarthy then, and this was like, we were talking about this during the end of 2023. Kevin McCarthy says, okay, we'll try to deal with it. Oh, never mind, we'll put it later. And then there's no speaker. And then it's just chaos for weeks as they're trying to figure out who the new speaker is. And so they literally can't do anything because there's no new speaker. And so the thing was, don't worry. I mean, this type of chaos during a giant geopolitical crisis where we need to put this. Who cares, though, because it'll be done in a few weeks. And then you have the new speaker, and the new speaker says, we're not going to abandon Ukraine. Great words, but then proceeds to say, well, we got to do the budget first, or we need to do this first. And then after all that was resolved, it was, well, we need to include immigration, because if we're going to protect the borders of a foreign country, then we should protect our own borders first. Now, I don't think I need to explain to you how different immigration policy is from the largest shooting war in Europe since World War II, and how you can have one distinct position on this and one distinct position on the other side. And the Republican position was absurd. It was HR 2. It's Trump era immigration policy. You lost the election. You don't get to institute all of your most favorite policies when you lose the election. At best, you can implement some of them through a compromise bill. That's the best you can expect to do. Maybe you can block stuff, but you can't expect to just take all of your policies after the voters said no and institute them anyway through control of one chamber barely. They were trying to negotiate as if they had like a flush and they had a pair of twos. It was ridiculous. But we had to entertain that nonsense, and until they combined these two issues that were completely distinct. I also don't like the combining of Israel and Taiwan, to be completely honest, because again, you could vote on these issues independently. They're distinct. And after they tie them together, we say, fine, you know what? We'll do it. We'll talk about these issues together as if they actually are together, even though that is not also the standard that Israel's held to. Israel aid is always approved. You don't need to approve immigration reforms for that. But when it's Ukraine, when we're talking about defending our largest export market in Europe, when we're talking about fulfilling our promises we made to Ukraine in the 90s after denuclearization, when it comes to trying to establish American credibility or try to establish deterrence in the no. Israel, though, our voters care about that. Fine, okay, it doesn't matter. There's no principle here. But we sit down and we negotiate with Senator Chris Murphy, I think.
Chris Murphy, James Langford
from Utah, hardcore conservative. This is not some moderate guy. This is not, I mean, I wouldn't even call Susan Collins particularly moderate, but he's not Susan Collins. He's not a super moderate. He is a conservative's conservative. And they sit down for months and negotiate. All this time just sitting down trying to negotiate. And we didn't get the big things I want. We didn't get the Dreamers. We didn't get the concessions on Dreamers that we wanted. We got very few concessions, and if anything, it felt like we were buttressing the issue. It was very little.
It was bipartisan in the strictest sense, but to your point, it was a relatively conservative border bill. And I think progressives have a completely valid take if they want to object to the merits of the bill. I mean, the most progressive thing that immediately jumped to mind, or that I can immediately recall, is it guaranteed right to counsel for unaccompanied minors, which is a bare fucking minimum. It's hard to even call that progressive, right? And yet, to your point, then they tanked the goddamn bill because Trump realized and told them. I mean, and so here's the thing. They don't even hide it. Like, I love a good political thriller. I love a good movie villain. And the Republicans are like Sunday morning cartoon villains. Like, they're twirling their mustache. They're not even hiding it. They're not subtle. Like, they're flat out fucking saying, Mitch McConnell's like, yeah, the politics on this have changed. And he was one of the ones championing the bill prior to it. I mean, just flat out in the fucking open. So then, to your point, they tanked their own bill for cynical political purposes. And by the way, as far as I'm concerned, they morally own the situation at the border, and Democrats have an obligation to pummel them with it. Pummel them. It is 100% now the fault of Republicans. If I say that there's a crisis, Dylan,
can I ask you, is that your genuine position, or is that your campaign position?
What? No, 100%. I think that. Oh, are you talking? But that's
talking to you. Like, do you think that this is a marketing strategy, or do you believe the moral weight is legitimately on the Republicans?
Both 100%, because to me it's like, if you and I are on opposite sides, like if we're in different political parties, but we both agree that there's a crisis that we're coming to deal with, and we go to the table and we negotiate a deal, and then I renege on the deal for cynical political reasons. I'm very transparent about it, on a crisis that I've acknowledged, and as a matter of fact, in many ways, I've been shouting out even louder than you. It's my fucking fault at this point that it doesn't get solved. And we actually have compelling polling to indicate that if Democrats make that, Chris Murphy actually, as a matter of fact, was the one who shared this, that even though Republicans have a 15-point lead on immigration, because of course they do, we've seen with swing voters in polls and in focus groups that when they're informed about what Trump and Republicans did, it's not the Democrats pull ahead on the issue, but that 15-point gap closes. So I'm not saying that it's going to be easy, but Biden has a compelling story to tell, which is, listen, you're upset about the border. I'm upset about the border. I gave Republicans fucking 95% of what they wanted. Or 80%.
You know what helps that James Lankford keeps coming out and saying we could have had compromises, we could have had stuff. And like during the Biden speech, when he nodded his head and said that's true, most Americans probably don't know who that guy who just nodded his head and said that's true is, right? If you're a nerd like us, you might know who James Lankford is, or if you're following the negotiations. But the more people can point to, like the Republican negotiators agree that we could have gotten these compromises. The big thing is if you're a Republican and you believe this is a real crisis, and definitely if you think it's a crisis that, hold up, we can't deal with the largest war in the world. We can't deal with our ally in Europe being invaded. We can't deal with the largest war in Europe since World War II until we deal with this because it's so important. And then you're given some compromise on it. You're given issues that the assistance that could help with. Hell, I remember at one point the Ukraine bill was bundled with fentanyl detection services on the border to make it, more attractive.
And they mothballed it. They did
mothball
those
it.
Fentanyl detect. That's the other. And by the way, I'm sorry, just a sidebar, because I really want ball busting Republicans or Democrats. I really want that. I really want us to try that. I love seeing these freshman Democrats in the House like Moskowitz and Crockett and Goldman. I think they're really raising the game of even like the elder statesmen like Jamie Raskin, who's one of my favorites. I would love for a Democrat to come out and be, because the charged rhetoric that Republicans use about Joe Biden's border crisis, Joe Biden, killed Laken Riley. We hear that sort of rhetoric from even elected Republicans. It'd be great for a Democrat just to try. Maybe it won't work, but be like, actually, it's Republicans who are deliberately getting Americans killed with fentanyl coming from the southern border while bitching about it, because they deliberately mothballed funding for these high-tech fentanyl scanning devices, which would have drastically
They wanted Putin to win more than they wanted to get rid of the fentanyl.
Or that, and also throw Putin in there too. Like, why not just try it? Maybe it won't work, but I mean, it's so gross. Like, I forgot all about how that was tied to Ukraine too.
Yeah, because at one point, this is the weird thing. Once the negotiation collapsed, because Trump openly said it's a campaign year, it would be bad for me if this happens. And so if this happens, then it's going to be politically difficult for Trump because that's what he's campaigning on. And it's like openly acknowledged by basically everyone, except for the ones who say, well, it wasn't tough enough. You're in it. Democrats control the Senate. Democrats control the presidency. You were never going to get everything you wanted. Democracy is all about compromise and finding a way for us to all to come together and find some solution that we can all live with, maybe not live with. But no. Right. It all is shut down. It's all closed down. Lindsey Graham has to turn around and then condemn the legislation that they were just like, woo, this is great. Seeing all these people come out against it. And then it's like,
what's funny though?
Yeah?
Lindsey Graham actually because I remember that. And then he came out like 2 days ago and acknowledged that Trump killed the border bill. That's where I can't understand fucking Lindsey Graham. Like, you're right, because he'll champion the border bill. Mm-hmm. Then when Trump gives him a marching order, then he's like, yep, we got to get rid of it. It's not what we need. We got to kill it. Then 2 days ago, he's like, we would have had something on the table, but Donald Trump told us to kill it. And it's like, and even Lankford, actually, what's funny is Lankford.
They're never going to get those compromises again, by the way, because they're not going to get. They need a filibuster-proof majority to pass it without Democratic support in the Senate.
Or hot take. What if Republicans do a filibuster carve-out? They've done it for shit in the past. I mean, usually
Trump would be the most willing to do it of all the Republicans that I could think of, too.
Right. Why not? I mean, that's the thing. Like, a filibuster, what's funny is, here's a hot take as somebody who's a progressive. I actually don't want to kill the filibuster. The filibuster is a tool that Democrats have actually used to blunt terrible ideas from Republicans. I think the filibuster, I just think you make carve-outs when and where appropriate. Now, that might eventually just whittle it down to nothing, but so be it. Like to me, like filibuster carve-outs for voting rights and healthcare and, codifying row protections, fucking do it. Well, the Republicans will do it. It's not a turn-based RPG. The Republicans can and will, whenever they goddamn well please. They can do a filibuster carve-out whenever they want. They don't. It's not like, damn it, we want to carve out the filibuster, but we got to wait for them to do it first. No, they can do it unprompted. So anyway, that's my hot take.
What got me the most was the period between Johnson releasing his plan and right after the negotiations all fell apart because Trump killed it. Because it was, we were back at the beginning of like the snake eating its own tail, where it was like, well, you have to have an immigration compromise in order to get Ukraine funding passed. Okay, let's do an immigration compromise. Well, we can't do an immigration compromise because it can't be a compromise. You just need to pass what we want. Well, we can't do that. So, okay, let's just pass Ukraine aid. Okay, but you need to have an immigration compromise. And then the circle, and it circles and circles. And it really, through their own either like fumbling and stumbling, or through their own political incompetence or boxing themselves in, Mike Johnson boxed himself in politically, where he had to move forward for Ukraine aid, for America's national security. He's getting the intelligence briefings. He also said he wouldn't. He made a promise at the start of his term, but he also promised that it would have to be passed with immigration reform, which was something they said multiple times, that it could only be passed with immigration reform. And then he proposes it, and guess what it doesn't have? Immigration reform. That was a lie. We didn't need to pass immigration reform. We could have just passed it on its own way back originally. Not to mention, when Mike Johnson was elected, he was elected on a mandate of vote on things based on their own inherent value. Stop with the mega bundling. Stop with the mega omnibuses.
No more omnibus. Done. No more omnibus.
That's what Matt Gaetz was really proud of. And then immediately, once bundling's useful, oh, never mind, or we can bundle a little bit, or hey, if it means that we can stop Ukraine aid, we'll bundle all day and all night. We were in this period where they had boxed themselves in, so we just had to give up on one of his previous commitments, and it's good that it was the one that didn't destroy American credibility in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, well, as you said, it definitely kicked America's credibility's ass. I mean, hopefully it didn't kill it perfectly, but I mean, it dealt it a pretty grievous blow. I mean, the whole thing is really despicable to me. And I mean, and speaking of despicable, the fucking shit today in the Supreme Court.
By the way, we cannot do this again. We cannot have it like a year passes and like the Russian offensive failed, but the war's still going on, because like people can talk about tapping out of a war, but that's like a two-player thing. You have to have both people agree. I don't want it to just be, because I'm hearing people talk about it like, where's our exit strategy? What do you mean exit strategy? We're not in the war. We're not fighting the war. The Ukrainians are fighting the war. We've been fighting the war for 2 years. We fought Afghanistan for 20 years, and Republican leadership was angry at Biden when he did pull out. And then when he did pull out, it wasn't done the right way, and it was awful, it was terrible, and he shouldn't have done it, and it destroyed American deterrence in Europe. But when it comes to Ukraine, we're 2 years in, no American soldiers dying, spending 0.5% of our GDP, and we're talking about exit strategy. Oh, I don't want to pass this bill because there's no exit strategy. The exit strategy is for the Russians, not for us. It costs us nothing.
Well, it's funny, actually. Yeah. Well, then on that point, before we turn to the Supreme Court thing, it actually kind of infuriates me with the reductive rhetoric that we hear, obviously from Republicans, because it's politically beneficial to them. But I hear a lot of like centrists and independents do. Like there were, we weren't in any wars under Trump. Now we're under wars under Biden. I'm like, actually, no, actually, mathematically, that's actually not true. We're directly involved in fewer wars under President Biden than we were under Trump, because we're out of Afghanistan. And to your point, we're not in Ukraine. We're not in.
They haven't lost a single soldier. Russia's lost over 300,000.
Right. And also on that front, because people talk about military casualties. Yeah, you had 13 service people die in Afghanistan because of ISIS-K. I'm sure, and I can't remember, I'm sure there have been additional casualties.
We had those three casualties in Jordan due to that Iranian drone bombing. One of their proxies did it.
Didn't we bomb them? Was it
Yeah,
Syria,
we killed like
Northern
50
Jordan?
of their guys for 3 of ours.
Right. So, but if you tally it up to whatever extent this grim metric matters to Republicans, the number of U.S. soldiers who have died, more soldiers died on Trump's watch. There were more combat casualties, according to the Defense Department, under Trump than there were under Biden.
People forget about like the deaths in Chad. People forget about this stuff very quickly.
Yeah. Well, and also
not to mention Trump escalated the drone war and then restricted the information on it. And so if you're somebody who's like a super libertarian, like, oh, I want to make sure we hold our government accountable. Trump's main interest isn't necessarily just full-blown isolationism. It's isolationism when it benefits him. Isolationism almost for sale, I think.
Yeah, he loves the patina, the appearance of isolationism. But to your point,
supported the invasion of Iraq. Just saying. Anyway, sorry, done.
And he'll fuck with foreign. I mean, again, Soleimani, which risks escalation with Iran, and even to your point about the drone war thing. I don't think there's been a public release. I don't even know. Maybe DOD doesn't know because of the decisions that Trump made with respect to tracking drones. We don't know. I know we don't know. And I don't even know if DOD knows how many drone strikes occurred under the Trump administration for precisely the reasons that you just described.
I don't know. I'd have to go check. I can't tell you off the top of my head, but I know he restricted the information on it and he increased the drone strikes during his presidency. By the way, during the Biden administration, there has been drone strikes, but it's not even comparable. I think it was like an 80 to 90% reduction. Now that might change. Of course, when I explain, like, when I try to describe, I remember Mark Twain had a way of describing the presidency that I thought was very good. And he described being the president of a country as being somebody on a raft going down the river. Like you can like one. Oh, sorry, I got a donation.
$5. Trump abandoned the Kurds.
Trump did abandon the Kurds. Thank you so much for the $5. I appreciate that. As the issues and problems come at you, it's like logs or rocks in the river, and you do your best to maneuver out of the way. Some of these things cannot necessarily be stopped. When people talk about, for example, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that happens on the Biden's watch, not Trump's watch. You can explain the Russian invasion of Ukraine under a Trump presidency very easily. If the Russians thought that the war was going to be over in a week, then what America did didn't really matter all that much. We send them weapons, well, they're going to be gone in a week anyway. We send them planes, well, they're going to be gone in a week. Unless America directly puts troops on the ground, which, I mean, from Trump, the semi-isolationist guy who held up Ukraine aid for political favors, like, is that a message being sent of strength and deterrence, that he cares so much about this that he's willing to put it at risk so he can get dirt on the son of his political opponent? I don't know if that projects deterrence. Right. And so the idea that if this crisis came down under Trump's term, he could have stopped it, I find that ridiculous. I find that silly. I don't think he has the diplomatic skill to do it, and I just think the log hadn't shown up yet. I think there could have been completely other different reasons. I think it's a very America-centric worldview to think something's going wrong in the world, it's the president's fault. Sometimes those things happen outside of the control of the United States. Other people in other countries, believe it or not, do have autonomy.
That's what I've heard. I've heard they have agency. But actually, on this point, because this is the thing I hear a lot when Biden and Trump are compared with respect to foreign policy. That's probably the single biggest point that I hear from Trump supporters. Our mutual buddy Rob Noor uses this one a lot. And what's funny is the thing I respond with is, okay, you telling me a thing did or did not happen on a president's watch. We don't have to say Trump. It could be Obama, it could be Biden, it could be any president, good or bad. I'm not going to give the president credit or the blame for that unless I can tie that event directly to an action or inaction. So, for example, there was a solar eclipse recently under President Biden's administration. That Biden didn't cause that, right? Just because it happened on his watch doesn't mean shit. I know the deep state's powerful. You're right. It's entirely possible. But also there was an eclipse on Trump's watch too.
It's the
Trump
true
did not
dark
cause
Brandon.
the eclipse.
Sorry. Okay, continue.
No, the double dark Brandon, because it was a double eclipse. Or no, it was a total solar eclipse. I'm sorry. But so that's my position. Like, listen, if you want me to give a president credit, or you want me to blame a president for something that happens on their watch, you need to show me what they did or didn't do, which contributed to it. So the thing I hear is, okay, there were Russia did not invade Ukraine on Trump's watch. He did on Biden's watch. And of course, he, oh my God, what was the name of it? Was it the Donbass? Was it under in 2014 under President Obama?
The Russians invaded Crimea, and Donetsk and Luhansk, which make up the Donbass. Yeah.
Okay. So there you go. So it's like, okay, Democrat, he invades. Another Democrat, he invades, but not under this particular Republican. So I guess my question is, for me, the obvious thing is, number one, you need to show me what he did to deter Putin. And they'll just say, well, he was like crazy and intimidating. I'm like, yeah, but I need something specific. So then they'll say he sanctioned the shit out of Russia. I've read conflicting reports, like our sanctions under Trump weren't shit as far as like hitting Putin.
There were sanctions, but when, like, the sanctions, were they around Ukraine, or what were the sanctions around? Were the sanctions like, if you would do this in Ukraine, we're going to sanction you more. If you do this in Ukraine, we're going to sanction you more. Like, if we sanction the Chinese for, like, theft of American IP,
intellectual property,
does that necessarily mean that they're going to use that as an indication of our deterrence on an invasion of Taiwan? Like, I don't necessarily take that way. It's the same reason, like, people talk about America's deterrence breaking in if we pull out of Ukraine, and I do think that's going to happen, because if we can't foot the bill to keep Ukraine up and in this fight and to try to push them towards victory, then it's kind of hard to think that America would actually put their men and women of the armed forces at risk for an island like Taiwan. It does have a real demonstrative effect on deterrence, But a government could argue that, well, we didn't care as much about Ukraine. We do care about Taiwan. Here's us verbalizing that commitment. And here's us, we're going to dedicate 20, 30, 40 billion dollars in aid to Taiwan to show that commitment, that we're taking action to that commitment. There's so many different ways that you can try to pull and tug on deterrence. But under this logic, then that would mean that World War II was a failure of deterrence for FDR, when it could have been that the Germans and the Japanese had their own interests, that due to just the course that they were taking under their ideological view of the world, under their state's interests, was inevitably going to crash within the American iceberg and American interests and our allies and what we supported and what we cared about in the world. That there were, once they had taken a certain route, they eventually bombed Pearl Harbor. Was that a failure of American deterrence? What was that a cause of? And I just think that we simplify it to, this happened under the presidency, therefore it's the president's fault. He did it.
All right.
But it's a big world. There's many forces at play. There's many motivations. Like, for example, was Saddam's invasion of Kuwait George Sr.'s fault? Or was it that he had economic issues that he rapidly wanted to deal with, and it got worse and worse and worse, and so he looked for a quick solution, and there was Kuwait?
Right, and it's an unfalsifiable counterfactual, right? Like we'd just be speculating, but to me, to your point, yeah, you need to prove something concrete. Plus, the other thing is, what about these other arguments, which I like too, which is, to the extent that Trump's behavior may have influenced Putin's timeline, maybe Putin thought that waiting to invade Ukraine, or perhaps he might not feel that he needed to invade Ukraine if Trump had been elected to a second term because of damage that Trump would have done to NATO. Or, I mean, again, you're much more of an expert on this stuff than me. How long was the buildup, like in terms of like armaments and training?
It was
and recruitment?
Late 2021 to early 2024. Recruitment less because they didn't think they needed to recruit anybody. They thought they could just kind of wander in the country and everybody would, throw flowers and kind of go, They thought it would be short. They didn't think it would be this much of an endeavor. But the thing that scared me the most is when they started getting the front line. That means blood that they could do blood transfers with, because that's not done with training operations. Once that's done, to me and to a lot of other people, that indicated, oh snap, there seems to be real either planning for something or real attempt to make it look like they're planning for something. And it turns out that they were planning for something. But yeah, it was months. It was months. Some people try to, for example, say that the pullout of Afghanistan, and I know this is something I heard Mitch McConnell, and I think it was, what's the 90-year-old senator? What was his name? He's not
Chuck Grassley.
Chuck Grassley said something similar to this, that the pullout from Afghanistan or weakness on Afghanistan made the Russians think that we would be unwilling to stick our neck out for. I think that the last decade of American policy in Ukraine made the Russians think we weren't going to do anything. I think that us not doing really much of anything when they invaded Crimea, or when they invaded Donetsk, or when they invaded Luhansk, or when they invaded all the times past that, secretly, that we know they did because there's photos of it, there's video of it. But I think all of that behavior is what led them to believe that, which was a failure of the Obama, Trump, and, in my opinion, somewhat the Biden administration. I think it was a multi-administration failure on judging what the Russians believed, what their interests were. I don't think, played into enough account that the Russian government genuinely believes that Ukraine can only exist as an extension of Russia.
Yeah, so I'll say this too, because Afghanistan, I mean, honestly, even though we don't talk about it quite as often as we did, Afghanistan was a turning point for the Biden administration, because that was when his popularity dropped and has never recovered since. It was been on a downhill trajectory ever since.
Who would have thought that the point would be pulling out of Afghanistan would be the point?
Listen, I'll die on this hill. This is like the one area of foreign policy where I hyperfixate on, because it also bleeds into electoral politics, which is more my area of expertise anyway, to the extent that I have any expertise, which is, to me, especially years out, right? It's been 2 years, 3 years almost. I feel like, because Piers Morgan, Destiny's been on Piers Morgan a lot lately, and to me, it's Piers Morgan frustrates me so much for a lot of reasons, because I think when he's at his best, he's pretty good on like moderating debates and interviewing. But when it comes to like domestic politics and how he grades Biden,
I don't think he gave crackhead Barney a fair enough shake.
I honestly haven't watched that thing, because like I saw that and I'm like, what the fuck is this? And I skipped it past. So
she starts foaming at the mouth. quite literally at one point. It's not great.
Yeah, so it's not very substantive then.
No.
Well, neither is his analysis, in my opinion, of what happened in Afghanistan, because these motherfuckers, I think, okay, so everybody forgets that it was actually Trump who inked the deal, the Doha Agreement, with the Taliban. We have a Special Inspector General's report which reviewed the collapse of Afghanistan. They identified that decision by Trump as the single most important decision as to why Afghanistan collapsed. Not that there weren't other reasons which meaningfully contributed, but if you had to pick the big one, it was Trump inking the deal with the Taliban, cutting the Afghan government out, and basically just making it a matter of time. Trump did that.
I have fear of him doing the same thing in Ukraine, which is he sits down with the Russians, make a deal, give this deal to the Ukrainians. You don't accept it, then bye. You're cut off.
Sure. And then, as is probably the case, then a Democrat will be elected behind him, and it'll be up to the Democrat to clean up the fucking mess. Republicans will blame the Democrat for it, even though the dominoes were tipped over under the Republican.
The problem is, like, again, this is, I don't want to talk about this like a normal policy issue, because like, and other issues, people's lives are at stake, but like you can't unfill the mass grave, right? And so if we lose 4 years and city after city is taken, or Kharkiv turns into Aleppo, and I mean, Anastasia is from Aleppo. I have a lot of friends not Aleppo, in Kharkiv. You can't undo that. You can only, it takes a lot more work to rebuild than it does to destroy.
And to your point, not only can you not, even if you can rebuild, you can't restore the dead to life. To your point, that's what I'm saying. Like the stuff it is super gross how it's just baked in. Because you look at it, and if you really evaluate it on its merits, you would think this would just kill the GOP politically, like what they've allowed to happen in Ukraine with a 6-month delay. But even though they're favored, even though Democrats are favored to take the House in November, it's not guaranteed. Right now, Republicans have better than even odds in taking the Senate. So that's the thing that interests me.
Really
one of the things that interests me. Well, one of the things that interests me is like it doesn't seem like we factor that in. Like it's just another thing. It's like sure, they may have contributed to exponential casualties in Ukraine with this 6-month critical delay, may have potentially, from the sounds of it, seriously impacted the war effort. Not that it's set in stone, but this could have been a meaningful, fucking of the war effort. But it's basically treated like they fucked a budget, like they fucked a budgeting bill. You know what I mean? It's almost like a clerical error. And I don't know how you change that.
You do see also in January and February of this year, you do see an escalation in civilian casualties. As the Russians are able to get through air defense breaks down, and more civilians get their homes blown up, and they collapse in their apartment blocks, and they get injured or killed. It's hard for me to directly be like, this is the death that I can directly associate, because like, who knows? Maybe the air defense would have missed the missile as it comes in. It's stuff that we don't know for sure, but I can make a pretty educated guess to say that if the Ukrainians had more air defense and it was approved for us to send it sooner, and it just doesn't fall on us, it falls on the Europeans that have over 100 there's over 100 air defense systems, Patriot systems in Europe. We could give them 10. It would not destroy European security for us to give them that. But it's hard for my mind not to start putting those lines together and thinking, gosh, this was completely avoidable, just with some decent, okay legislating. If anything, it almost feels like the most direct example that an authoritarian regime could point to say, there's the flaw of democracy. Right there. It is right there.
What do you make of Turner and McCall and Republicans like that?
Can I say quickly before we get off of Afghanistan?
Sure.
I don't think Afghanistan was the cause of the Russian invasion of Ukraine for a few reasons, but the big one would be that the buildup on the border preceded the withdrawal. The decisions for the buildup to the border preceded the withdrawal's completion. And so it's hard for me to imagine that those gears, as many people who are trying to like build a timeline of what those early days were like, seems to happen, or most estimations of that happened before the withdrawal happened, leads me to believe that he was at the very least entertaining said ideas before the decision and before the withdrawal was done, that the decision was already made at that point.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's classically, post hoc ergo propter hoc that the Republicans are doing. After it, therefore, because of it, without like tying it directly there at all. You have Republican congressmen like Turner and McCall saying that Russia has infiltrated their party. Have you read that? What a fucking startling
It
admission.
is scary. It is scary to hear, Mitch McConnell have to talk about openly, like, I think this started with Tucker Carlson, and I think Tucker Carlson would maybe be one subject, but I'm looking at these amendments on the Ukraine aid, and I thought I was reading just like Russian state TV, because I watch a lot of Russian state TV, and it is, just, we're going to destroy this city, we're going to destroy that city, and all the Ukrainians that are left, well, like, we say the Ukrainians are Russians, but all the good ones already left, so if we bomb their city, it's okay, because all the good ones have already come to Russia. And then they're just like this justification for like horrific acts, the cover up of war crimes, just horrible, horrible stuff. And I'm listening to like the same rhetoric, and the same stuff's being argued in these amendments. The biological laboratories thing, that is the Russian version of weapons of mass destruction in Ukraine. They said that the Ukrainians had biological weapons that targets Russian DNA. And I've had this argued to me in calls by Russia supporters in debates with them, that they believe this. And they believed it at the start. It's been 2 years. They still haven't found any evidence that they had biological weapons laboratories that were researching weapons to target Russian DNA. Weapons of mass destruction. They had to invade to get the weapons of mass destruction. And all of the biggest and brightest alternative media minds who don't fall for no psyops, they go out and eat it up. They eat up the alternative version of the weapons of mass destruction lie. Why? Because it wasn't their government official that said it. It was their government official who said it. Right. So it's pathetic to see that taken by a U.S. congressperson and put as an amendment to the Ukraine aid bill, which Marjorie Taylor Greene did. The thing that scared me more than the rest of them, though, was when she put the legislation in about no aid to Ukraine, and some of them were just stupid, like no aid to Ukraine, take it all, give it to Hawaii. Like, it was just like everything they could to just grab the aid, throw it somewhere else. One of it was no aid to Ukraine until they resolve the linguistic issues of the Hungarian community in Transcarpathia. And I'm thinking, like, I work in Ukraine, and I think I've said Transcarpathia maybe 3 times.
I honestly, here's the thing. It's funny, when I read that, I almost, I'm glad I caught myself. I almost dunked on her in a video because I'm like, fucking meant Transylvania or some. I didn't even know it was a real term until I think maybe you tweeted about it or something on.
Transcarpathia is a mountainous region of Ukraine. I want to go there and do mushrooms desperately. Of course, I would never, because I follow the law. But I want to go there and do mushrooms desperately because it's so beautiful. It's so amazing. And when the war is over, I think that's going to be my vacation spot that I want to go to. But it has a Hungarian-speaking community there, and there's a linguistic issue of whether or not Hungarian should be taught in the schools as like one of the primary languages, because there's like Hungarian-speaking communities where the Ukrainian government having language used against it like a weapon, which it has had from the Russians, where, hey, they speak Russian, therefore they're Russian, we take them. Having that scares them a lot, and so they're very proud of their language, and their language has historically been banned in Ukraine under the Russian Empire. And so they're very much like, if you're working in a public office, you speak Ukrainian, then if they speak Russian to you, then you can switch over to Russian. That's the language laws that have been instituted. So some of the laws in the region that have a Hungarian community is about that Hungarian community speaking Ukraine while you live in Ukraine. Speaking Ukrainian while you live in Ukraine. Now, number one, if you took those issues and applied it in the United States, the Marjorie Taylor Greene would be on the Ukrainian side of the issue. You'd be like, yeah, you live in America, you speak American, you speak the English. Yeah. They 100% would be on their side of the issue. But because that's a big issue in Russian state media and a big issue with Viktor Orban's clique, I think it ended up in her talking points. I think one of her staffers, and this is the thing that really scares me, Marjorie Taylor Greene's crazy enough. What's the type of people that Marjorie Taylor Greene would choose to be in her immediate vicinity giving her talking points? One of them must have taken this either from Russian state media or from Viktor Orban aligned media, who, I mean, is very authoritarian as well. And the right has a weird fetish for Viktor Orban. And he speaks at CPAC. Yep, speaks at CPAC. Yep. They love the guy. Tucker Carlson did a very flattering documentary of a man who has centralized control of the media and has the most public sector corruption of any EU country. Oh, I hate corruption. I hate the deep state establishment. Who's my favorite European leader? The most corrupt one. Finally,
right. What's Orban call a system? Illiberal democracy, right?
Illiberal democracy.
We have elections. We have them. You know? Yeah, it's super. It really is fucking gross. And that's what I'm saying. Like, it's so bewildering to me. And even on, the domestic front, I know we talked briefly or I did a super chat about the Supreme Court thing. This is where, I don't know. Will you be gone in Ukraine till the election happens?
I will be coming back to try to help out because, I mean, the fight for freedom is international, man.
Right. No, 100%.